Good afternoon, everyone. I thought I would dispense with the suspense. And first of all, welcome to the stage our Dean Phil Kaminsky. Maybe. Dean Kaminsky is part of the College of Engineering executive team. He is also the head of student services, and he's the former chair of the Department of Industrial Engineering. Phil is here today with our special speaker, and he will be hosting and moderating the chat. Our speaker is one of the world's most influential innovators. She was integral in launching some of Google's most important products: Gmail, Google Search, Google Maps. In 2012, she made history and became the youngest CEO of any Fortune 500 company. She became the CEO of Yahoo. At Yahoo, she was equally influential and took the company to hit over 1 billion in users, tripled the mobile users, and in addition, in a very challenging time, identified additional revenue models to the tune of over $1 billion additional dollars. Please welcome Innovator, who has the mind of an engineer but the heart of a leader, Marissa Mayer.
Welcome to Berkeley.
Thanks for having me.
It's a real treat to have you here. And over the next half hour, 40 minutes, we're going to talk a little bit about your journey from student to executive. And let's start at the beginning of your journey in Wisconsin. It's my understanding that you grew up in Wisconsin and you wanted to be a doctor. You went to Stanford to originally to be pre-med, to eventually study medicine, which in my mind brings up two questions. We'll start with the easy one first. Why medicine?
I think I was good at math and science. I liked the notion of caring for people, healing the human body, all of those types of things. And so I think medicine was a natural thing to be drawn to. And the next question?
The next question, of course, why Stanford?
Well, it's funny because obviously from Wisconsin, I applied to a lot of local schools. I applied to some bigger schools on the coast. So, no, I did not apply to Cal, but I did apply to the University of Wisconsin-Madison, which is like the Berkeley of the Midwest.
So why did you decide to come out west, to move from the Midwest all the way out west?
I applied to a lot of different schools and got into most of them. When I sort of looked around, I realized like a lot of the other really good opportunities that I had at University of Wisconsin-Madison, at Northwestern, they had programs that were going to fast track through undergraduate and into medical school, basically allowing you to do the program in like 6 years as opposed to 7 or 8. And I realized that as much as I thought I was really excited about medicine, if I changed my mind, it would be really hard to move off of that track. And so I thought, I'd like to spend some time, sort of expanding my horizons, especially at the beginning of college. And so I thought I should go to a school that, was more well-rounded in a lot of different disciplines. And so ultimately I picked Stanford.
So you came out west, you came to Stanford, and you started off, I guess, in neuroscience, and then you made a change. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Well,
I was really sure I wanted to be a pediatric neurosurgeon. I was very specific. I liked working with children. I had met a pediatric cardiologist that worked at a medical school, taught, and also took exceptional cases, and that just sounded just great to me. And then I came out here to Stanford and took all the introductory biology courses, the introductory chem courses, and at the end of the first year, I went back to Wisconsin. A lot of my friends were good at math and science too, interested in medicine. We kind of compared notes, and while I was really far from home, spending a lot, on Stanford, could have gone to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for a lot less. It was exactly the same. And we were memorizing the same flashcards, building with the same, molecular models, all of those different things. And I realized that I wanted to do something that was more unique to my college experience. And I also realized that one of the things I'd held dear was there was a phrase that someone said to me once. It was about a guy named Zune, and it's not what Zune knows, it's how Zune thinks. He was one of the most amazing thinkers and problem solvers I've ever experienced, and it really was true. They said, it's not necessarily all the facts that he knows, the languages he knows. It's the fact that you can kind of put him anywhere, and very quickly he can figure out the questions to ask and what to do even in a foreign environment. And so I thought about, were there things I could do that would change my problem-solving skills, how I thought about things, basically how I thought, not necessarily what I knew. And on my plane ride back to Stanford, my sophomore year, I happened to be flipping through the course catalog, picking classes, and I saw this major called Symbolic Systems, which takes philosophy, psychology, linguistics, and computer science and wraps them all together in a multidisciplinary major. And it's basically the study of basically how people learn, which is cognitive psychology, how people reason, logic in philosophy, how people express themselves, linguistics, and can you cause a computer to do the same with computer science? And I realized that a lot of my interests in neuroscience and in medicine had to do with how do people learn and reason and express themselves, not necessarily in the physicality of medicine. And so I took a linguistics class because that was the area I probably knew the least about in the major. And I realized that I really liked it, and then I just decided to keep going with it and change my major to symbolic systems, despite the fact that my parents were like, what are you going to do with a symbolic systems degree when you're done? But I felt like it was a great time to really get to explore a lot of different disciplines.
So do you think those different skills that you picked up help you throughout your career?
For sure. I mean, I think that my role at Google, I started off as an engineer, and I was coding on different AI algorithms and things that were more suited to my background, because I ultimately ended up doing a specialization in artificial intelligence. And then after I'd been at Google for about 4 months, the VP of engineering, Urs Hotze, called me in and said, we haven't been able to hire anyone to do interface design or interface work in 4 months. We need someone to do it. Can you start doing that 1 day a week? You've got this thing in your background, symbolic systems, seems to have some design and psychology in it. Can you do that 1 day a week and then go and work on your AI projects the other 4 days? And so I started doing that, and that led to some work in design, and that ultimately led to some work in product management. And then ultimately I switched from engineering to product managing, and the rest is sort of history. But I became much more focused on product and design.
Sorry. Do you ever miss doing engineering? Do you ever miss coding?
I do. I think it's probably for the best for both Google and Yahoo that I didn't code professionally. I think that you're a much better coder when you're doing that full time, and really, especially on such involved programs. But I do still like to dabble in it. I've got a couple of art installations at home where I technically can program them and change them, and it's always kind of fun to sort of dabble in that, or write up a little script that just does what you want it to do, things like that.
Cool. Did you got a master's degree also? Is that right?
I did. I felt like at the end of my undergraduate, where I'd been so broad across these 4 different disciplines, that I wanted to be able to market myself as a software engineer. And because I had gone really deep in symbolic systems and artificial intelligence, it was kind of interesting. I had taken a bunch of graduate classes in artificial intelligence, but I had missed some things like operating systems and databases and some of the hardcore algorithms classes during my undergraduate by not majoring in computer science. And so I felt that it was important to go back then as a master's student and do that. So I almost kind of inverted my degrees, because in many ways my undergraduate ended up being more specialized and more at the graduate level, and then I kind of used my master's degree to go back and kind of fill in the gaps on some of the programming basics.
So you made all kinds of big decisions early in your life. You moved all the way from the Midwest to California. You switched from medicine to symbolic systems and computer sciences. You were taking all kinds of risks. Are there any other kinds of decisions you can remember, big risks that you took that really shaped the trajectory of your life?
Well, I think probably the biggest risk I ever took was on Google. it's funny because I'm renting the office where Google started, or at least where I started at Google, so I get to go back there every day. And it's this wonderful reminder of that history and of that moment. But now I remember it like it was yesterday because it's where I interviewed and all that. And so when I first met Google, they were 7 people. And they were doing a few 100,000 searches a day. They were desperately looking for a woman engineer. It was at the end of my job hunt. I had secured offers from a lot of different companies. But, you know, they kind of came in at exactly the right moment. I went there and interviewed with them at a ping pong table because they couldn't afford a conference table and a ping pong table for unique purposes. So the conference table was the ping pong table. And by the time I started, I interviewed at the end of April, early May. And by the time I started in June, it was about 20 people. But it was a huge risk. It was a startup. I remember, they couldn't print business cards, so they just printed them on a dot matrix printer. You guys are like, these are like things like you see in the Computer History Museum, but they used to like have printers that printed things like using like little dots. And so if you actually looked at the early Google business cards, you could see the dots. And they actually tore the business cards apart themselves, so you could see the little perforated edges. I actually have the original business cards that both Larry and Sergey gave me that day. It's pretty funny, but I remember like there were all these like paper, like little pieces of paper from them pulling their business cards apart all over the carpet at that office, and I remember being like, it was very clear they couldn't afford someone to vacuum or even a vacuum that they could use, and so it was very, very scrappy, but they had this huge vision for how search could change the world, and it was really compelling. And I remember thinking, they were the smartest people of any company that I met with, and I thought that was really impressive, and it was one of the attributes that I felt had been attributed to some of the best decisions I had made. So I was impressed with how smart they were, but more than anything, I was also impressed with the fact that they wanted to try and do something really big. And I thought, look, there's a very unlikely chance that they succeed, probably 2%, better than most startups, but still really low. But if they do succeed, and they're right, they're going to build a Fortune 500 or a Fortune 100 company. And how many people get a chance to be in the first 10 or 20 people at a company like that? And even if we fail, I'll probably learn so much from the failure that, it'll be better experience later in life. So I felt like it was the right moment to take that kind of risk. And certainly in terms of the experience of being there, of helping to grow Google, watching the impact that it's had on the world, it was really, really the experience of a lifetime.
So did you know right when you walked in and you saw the business card trimmings on the floor and the ping pong table, did you instantly know that was the place for you?
I did not. In fact, I remember having this because it was 1999. It was the tech boom. If you were graduating with a computer science degree, you had tons of job offers. And so it was very easy for me to pick the best job in each category. I had some teaching jobs. It was very obvious which one was was the best one. I had some consulting jobs. I had some startup jobs, some big company jobs. In the end, but I found it very difficult to integrate across. Like, how do you compare consulting to coding and things like that? And so in the end, it became Google versus McKinsey. And I remember talking to my parents the night before I had to accept the job offers. And I was like, I remember the business card so well because it was so stark. Because I was like, they were like trying to tell us how different your life will be at these 2 different companies. And I was like, the McKinsey card was printed on like 60-pound paper, and if you ran your fingers over it, it was like, you could feel the engraving, and it was in like really subtle, lower caps, uppercase letters that were with big and small letters, like with their name subtly in the corner as opposed to in the center of the card. And Google at that time had the big original puffy logo with the exclamation point, the dot matrix printer, super colorful, and this flimsy paper. And I was like, if you could just see the business cards, you'd understand the decision that I'm making. And also, the name was like a punchline. So I definitely had concerns that, for every family reunion for the rest of time, people would be like, oh, right, so Marissa graduated from college, and she went to this company called, get this, right? And so, because the name itself is like a punchline. But I really felt there were 2 things that categorized a lot of the best decisions I had made. One is I had always worked to surround myself with the smartest people I could find, because I think that they push you, they sort of elevate the way you think and work. And 2, I always did something I was a little not ready to do. moving all the way to California, changing my major, even though I couldn't describe it well why I was motivated to do it, to my father, right? Like I got to work at the AI lab at Stanford Research Institute after taking like 2 programming classes. So I barely knew how to program, and I was working alongside all these programming legends. And like, not understanding the programming language Lisp, which is all they spoke in very well at all. And then I got to move to Switzerland to work for the Union Bank of Switzerland in a research lab one summer, even though I didn't speak German, let alone Swiss German. And I felt like in each of those cases, at the end of the first day, I had this kind of sinking feeling in my stomach, like, why did I think this was a good idea? But in each of those cases, I would say that by doing something I felt unprepared to do, it really pushed me and made me take a risk, and I really grew from those. And so when I had to decide between my job offers, I thought to myself, those are the 2 criteria. Find where's the place that has the smartest people? What do you feel really unprepared to do? And in part because I thought it was going to be highly likely that Google would fail, to me that was kind of the part of it that I was like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this. I'm not sure I'm ready to be at a startup that's this intense, that has ambitions this big, where the chance of success is so low. But it was a really terrific decision.
So when did your parents accept that you weren't going to be a doctor and you weren't going to go to McKinsey and that you still made the right decision?
I think it was the good news was the viral spreading of Google happened pretty quickly and made it easier. So, when Google was like unheard of by everyone, that was a pretty brutal, I would say, 2 or 3 years. And also, like, I would go and give talks like this, and inevitably the first question from the audience would be like, Google's great, but like, how are you going to make any money at all? Because the ads were really subtle, and no one really believed in search ads. Everyone believed in banner ads. And so, there were for the first 2 or 3 years, I think people in the industry wondered about the business model. People in my hometown of Wausau, Wisconsin, wondered what it was and why this was a good idea. But I still remember there was, I think, one Thanksgiving when I went home, maybe like 2002, 2003, and we went to this sort of social at our church at home, and everybody, I remember we were sitting at this table, and the 2 other families sitting there had both heard of Google and used Google, and like obviously my parents had been using it, and I was like, oh, like it's starting to happen. Like people are getting it. They get how good the search is. They see what the opportunity is. They understand how useful the internet and this wealth of information is. So then it sort of, I remember at that, to me that felt like the turning point, was my parents being like, oh, they're friends, and like, they're, people that they knew were using it, and it was starting to become successful. Even then, whether or not we were going to really make a lot of money was still yet to be seen, but.
So you had finally made it in Wisconsin. Google finally made it in Wisconsin. So I think when you're 18 or 20 or 22, it's easy to say, take chances, maybe it'll fail, but you'll still get some life experience. Do you think the way that you've made decisions has changed over the years?
Maybe. I think that the other story that came with picking Google, it did change the way that I make decisions. I had a good friend, a college mate, who I turned to as I was making the decisions. And he was this amazing econ major. He's still one of my best friends. And he had graduated. I was doing my master's. I drove over to his apartment, and I said, and we laid out all the offer letters. And I'm a big fan of matrices. And so, I made a big matrix when I picked a college, like college rank, average SAT score, student ratio, for each of the different schools. And I did the exact same thing for my jobs. Like, every job was a row, every column was like salary, bonus, career trajectory, happiness quotient, and then all these different things, and then location, and then it was funny because my friend Andre said to me, look, some of these things can't be captured in discrete values. We need graphs, sort of showing what will happen potentially over time in different scenarios. And so we really got into it, and we spent 5 or 6 hours really analyzing this problem every possible way, and thinking through all these different job offers. And then we kind of got to the end of this, and he turned to me and was like, well, Marissa, this has been really fun for me. I hope this has enlightened you too. And I just burst into tears. And he was like, what? And I was like, I'm just completely overwhelmed. I have no idea how to make this decision. We've completely immersed ourselves in it for all this time, and I feel like I need to make this decision. It was middle, probably May 7th, something like that. I promised myself I would make a decision by May 1st. I hadn't. I'd given myself an extension. And I was like, I've just got to make a decision. I have no idea how. And then Andre said something that I still to this day say was the best piece of advice I've ever gotten, where he said, look, I've looked at this, for the last 6 hours with you. I think I understand it as well as you do and as well as anybody does. And I think you're looking at it all wrong. And he said, you're putting a lot of pressure on yourself to pick the right choice. And he's like, that's not what I see here. He's like, I see a bunch of good choices. And then I see the one that you'll pick and commit to and make great. And he said, go to bed, sleep on it, and whatever you think of first in the morning as what you want to do, go with that. And so I slept on it, and I woke up the next morning, and I wanted to work at Google. I wanted to work at Google because the smartest people were there. That early team was so impressive, as was their vision. I wanted to work at Google because I felt unprepared for it. I wanted to work at Google for a whole lot of reasons I couldn't even articulate, and to this day still can't articulate. But I think that notion that sometimes, especially when you're in that student mindset, you look at a series of choices and you're trying to find the absolute right answer. But that notion of just saying, look, understand that there's going to be some things that can't be articulated, expressed in discrete values or graphs or any of the above. But you have to look at things as a set of good choices, and then there's the one that you pick to and commit to and make great is really, really an important one. And so that notion of there's not right and wrong choices, but there's good choices and there's the great ones.
Interesting. Do you think you can make decisions about who to hire or which investments to make or which product features to focus on in the same way?
I think I do. I think, I tend to analyze, if not overanalyze things. And then at the end, I do think a lot of it comes down to instincts, because as you really immerse yourself in a problem and think through, which person should I hire, which features should we prioritize, you analyze every possible way. But a lot of it comes from the fact that because you've been working on this product or this company, you have an instinct for what's going to go well. And you have to, to me, look at all the data, but then also trust your instincts. And the data and your instincts together will ultimately lead you to the right decision.
And then once you make that decision, do you ever go back and question it?
I think that a lot of it is you have to commit. And that doesn't mean that you can't say, I made a mistake, or revisit it. And sometimes that's actually a really powerful thing to do. But I also think that you need to give yourself enough time for the decision to really take hold. Except that there were really, really good reasons why you made that decision. I don't know if it's true, but it anecdotally sounds right to me. I think that the statistic is in restaurants, something like 75 to 80% of new restaurants will fail in the first year. And they've studied all the different reasons why, and a lot of times it's a first-time entrepreneur opening up a restaurant. They don't necessarily understand how much to buy. They overspend on supplies or on equipment, things like that. But I've also been told that at least half of those failures come from menu changes. Basically, you're not getting enough people in the restaurant at night. You start to wonder, should it be pure Chinese or should it be fusion, right? Should we alter this menu? Should we offer that? Should we eliminate this one entree we've never sold that many of? And the chef gets nervous and starts changing the menu all the time, and that's right when your repeat visitors who actually like those items on the menu start to come back. And I know for me, I can think of a few restaurants that I really liked that ended up not making it. And that's true for me, but I would go back one time and the things I liked on the menu just weren't there. And I think it came from sort of those nerves. And by analogy, I think that when you make a decision, you do need to commit to it and really give it the chance to be successful over time. And sometimes if you doubt yourself too much, you'll ultimately actually cause a failure through that indecision and revisiting.
So then how do you find a balance between what smart employees are telling you, or maybe a board of directors is telling you, and your own commitment to the decision that you've thought carefully about?
I think you have to also know yourself. One of the more painful things that happens in business is when you realize that you've hired the wrong person. And I've now hired hundreds, if not thousands, of people, even directly in my career. And they were not all the right people, and I've made some very public large mistakes in that way. I've also made smaller mistakes. You sort of learn yourself over time, what the patterns are, when someone's going to work out, when they're not going to work out. And it's sort of funny, my husband and I have all of our kind of profound conversations when brushing our teeth at morning or at night. It sort of is like the moment we actually get to like talk to each other. And every now and then I'll talk about a business problem. But a lot of times if I mention, like I'm getting kind of worried about person X, he'll always turn to me and say, okay, you already know by the time we're having this conversation, by the time that you're bringing it to me out loud, you're already late, right? Because he's like, you're an optimist. You think it's going to turn around. And so the fact that you're now verbalizing it means that you already know that something's not right and you're probably going to end up making a change. And so, he taught me that about myself. And so I sort of now know to look for it, right? To know, wait, when am I being, optimistic without foundation and, try to get to that tipping point sooner, both for the good of for both of us, that individual or for me.
So when did you think you started to learn that skill? When you started to become aware of your skills and your limitations and how they affect your decisions?
I don't know. I mean, I think that you learn a little bit from every decision you make, whether it was successful or not. Did you have to revisit it? The ones that are really painful to undo, right? Launching a product that didn't work, having it be a modest success, suddenly you've got like a few million users on it, now you have to shut it down, apologize to all those users, move on. The really painful decisions to unwind, or I for example, when I first arrived at Yahoo, I hired a COO who's an amazing person, but he wasn't the right person ultimately for that role, in my opinion. And it was very public, having to move on from that COO. And I think that those decisions that are more painful are also some of the ones that you learn the most from about yourself, because you don't want to make those same mistakes again.
Okay, thank you. Let's change topics a little bit and talk about mentorship. I've seen you say several things in various places about mentorship, and I think I'd like to start with Professor Eric Roberts, who you've identified as somebody who had an influence on you early in your career path. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, Professor Roberts is amazing. So when it's sort of funny, my computer science career, and I'll talk about how I met Eric and a lot of the encouragement he gave me along the way. There's at least 3 or 4 good anecdotes. When I was at Stanford, as I said, I was pre-med freshman year. Computer science was not what it is today, but we needed to take computer science to fill basically our requirements. It was like the science and technology requirement. And I took a course there known as CS 105A, which is Introductory Computer Science for non-majors. And literally, you might even do a little programming in it, but I remember one of our homework assignments was load the Mosaic browser. Again, this was all invented the year that you were born, 1993, maybe, and go find a menu of this one restaurant in Palo Alto and find out the price for chicken fried steak and write it down on your problem set. These were the kinds of tasks they gave us. And I remember Professor Clausing, not Professor Roberts, who was the teacher, stood up the first day. It's a big class, 400 people, and he just said, look, extensive studies of all of you have shown that exactly 2 of you will go on to take any additional computer science classes ever. So we'll make this really easy on all of you and on me, right? And it's sort of funny because I guess I was one of those 2 people who would go on to take more. But as a result, I knew a little bit about computer science, and I knew that I liked it. I liked CS 105A quite a lot that spring quarter. And so when I came back, I took linguistics. I started getting into symbolic systems. In the winter, I took CS 106A, which is the introductory computer science course for majors at Stanford. And I took it from Professor Roberts. And he had these 3 contests, which were programming contests. They were additional assignments that were optional, and they were judged competitively. And if you won, you got an automatic 100% on the final, which basically guaranteed you an A+ in the class. And you got to go and have dinner at Eric Roberts' house. And if you were a runner-up, you still had to take the final, but you got involved in the dinner. And so I love design, and my mom was an art teacher, and so one of the contests was a graphics contest. So I wrote a screensaver, and I didn't win, but I was the runner-up, which actually probably was the best of all outcomes because it meant I had to study for the final in order to do well on it. But I got invited to Eric Roberts' house after the semester was over with all the other contest winners. And I just remember, and it was probably, just part of his routine at those dinners, but there was one point where, he kind of made a point of talking to each of us individually, either at the buffet or, while we were eating dinner. And I still remember he loves incredibly spicy Chinese food, and being from the Midwest, I was really not ready for that. And he gives really, really tiny beverages. I remember being really, really spiced out at that dinner. And he came over to me and said, look, you're really good at this. You should keep going with it. Maybe you could become a section leader, which is where undergraduates teach sections of about 8 students, and maybe you could become a lecturer. But he's like, I really think you should keep going with it. And honestly, I don't even think it was necessarily a personalized word of encouragement. He just knew these were the graphics contest winners at his house. But that really, fired me up, and I was like, okay, I'm going to keep going with computer science. I will become a section leader, which I went on to become. I then did go on to lecture and teach computer science for about 10 different quarters at Stanford. I became the head TA, and then I became the lecturer. And it was a really amazing experience, and I also became really good friends with Professor Roberts through all that. And I went to Switzerland for the summer, right in the middle of my master's degree. And when I came back, Professor Roberts had hired me to lecture for the first time. So I went in to sort of get my assignment, catch up, and he asked me what I had done that summer, and I talked about my research, and I said, well, I was building a companion to web browsing where it keeps track of where you go on the web, like a path. So if you go to sites A, B, and C, I would capture that path, and then I would do collaborative filtering, kind of Amazon style, people who bought this book also bought these books, but I'd be like, somebody goes to A, B, and C, someone later goes to site B, recommend sites A and C as possibly relevant, since they were before and after that web browsing path. And he said, oh, that's so interesting. There's these 2 guys on the 4th floor, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, they were doing PhDs. They weren't looking at where people went on the web, they were looking at the link structure of the web, but it sounds kind of the same. They just left the program to start a company, but I can't remember what it's called. and I still give Eric Roberts such a hard time about this, because I was like, well, I just got back in the country. I'm teaching for the first time. I'm a little overwhelmed. I don't have time to mess around with the startup right now. No matter. And then it was so funny, because the next April, I got this email from one of the early Googlers, Salar Kamangar, and he mailed me and said, I got your name from a professor who said you're graduating this spring and that we should talk. And at that point, I was supposed to be just deleting all new incoming offers, right? I was like, make up your mind. May 1st, you've got to make up your mind. And due to a long-distance relationship and a really bad bowl of pasta, I was sitting in my dorm room late on a Friday night. This email came in that said, work at Google, ? And I remember looking down and being like, this pasta is just so bad. And I'm just so lame that I'm here eating this bad bowl of pasta on a Friday night. And I kind of hit the space bar, which opened the message. And then I saw that it wasn't actually like a forum letter recruiting email. It was actually personalized by Salar. And I mailed them back and I said, I'm going to make my decision in the next week. I'd really love to meet with you, but I need to be interviewed Monday or Tuesday at the latest. And that's when I went in for the ping pong table interview. But it actually worked out better, because if Eric Roberts had remembered the name Google that previous September, they had barely just gotten payroll started. It was really just the 3 of them. They wouldn't go on to hire any new college grads for a number of months. They weren't really in a position to hire me, but by the next April, they had gotten some of their funding, and we're starting to really scale up, and it sort of worked out perfectly. But I do think it's so funny that Eric couldn't remember the name Google. I give him a hard time to this day.
So that's a mentoring relationship that really paid off for you. I think, here, a lot of the students here have lots of opportunities to work with mentors, to find mentors. What advice could you give them about sort of the way to best take advantage of those kinds of opportunities?
Sure. I would say, I've had lots of mentors in my career. I tend to be pretty informal about it. I think sometimes people are too formal about it. They'll come up to you after a talk or after a class and say, I'm really looking for a mentor. Will you be my mentor? And that's really not how mentoring relationships develop, because the best mentoring relationships, the person has some context for you. Maybe, is someone who's in a class with you and a few years ahead, a professor. They've got sort of a little bit more. It's just a little bit more informal overall. But the other thing I did is I started an associate program while I was at Google. It's known as the APM program, and very proud of it. Now, literally several hundred people have gone through it, and they're some of the best product managers in Silicon Valley, not only in my opinion, but certainly in all the different companies they've gone on to populate: Facebook, Airbnb, Dropbox, Uber. And so, in that program, we have management training. And so you actually have a management coach. It's pretty unusual to get hired into a program where you have a management coach, as a 23 or 24-year-old. And one of the things I had to do is really help those students get the most out of that management coaching, out of that mentoring. And one of the things we started doing was saying, look, rather than it just having it be kind of a broad mentoring relationship, go to those sessions, every other week or every week, depending on the frequency, and actually have a question and a task in mind, right? And so sometimes, someone would come and say, I'm in a disagreement with my tech lead. I just wrote this email, should I send it? And by the way, the answer to that question is almost always no. If you have to ask, don't send that email. I'm leading this meeting and it's just not working well, the flow, the agenda, we're just not getting out of it what we want to get out of it. And by coming with a really specific question, it allows the mentor to get in-depth enough and give really concrete advice that will help you improve. But through that process, we'll also probably take you through enough anecdotes, analogies, that there's things that will be applicable beyond that situation.
So by the time you were very senior at Google or when you were at Yahoo, did you have the opportunity to mentor people?
I'd like to think that. I started the Associate Product Manager program in 2002. We hired seven new grads into the first program. It was a bet with my boss. He was trying to hire experienced product managers, and he had hired 2 in 4 months. You should really scale product managers in alignment with engineers, 1 to 10, 1 to 8, kind of pick a ratio and scale them. Engineering, in the meantime, was adding 8 people a week. So we were basically Wayne Rosing had hired 64 engineers. We had hired 2 product managers. That doesn't scale. And so I went to Jonathan Rosenberg and said, I want to hire some product managers. And he said, fine, but what are you going to do? And I was like, I'm going to hire new college grads right out of school, and I'm going to kind of put them through the same program that Salar and I were put through, which is I'm going to give them way too much responsibility, and we'll just coach them and or yell at them the way Larry and Sergey yelled at us until they really rise to the challenge and become what we know they can become. That's ultimately what we did. But over the 10 years that I ran the associate program at Google, we hired about 200 people. And I joke, but it's really true that at that time I didn't have children. They really are my children. I go to all their weddings. They have babies. I'm sending baby gifts. I really, I call them my kids, but they really are. We have a great relationship overall, and I'm very, very proud of all of them, and there's no question that I've gotten at least, if not as much, if not more, out of learning from all of them over these years too.
That's wonderful. So one of the people you work with, I'm not sure if you'd call him a mentor, but he is a Cal grad, Eric Schmidt. And I believe that you said that you still hear Schmidtisms to this day. What are some of the things that come to mind when you...
I heard Eric in my head. He was an amazing leader at Google. It's sort of funny that all these pivotal figures in my life are Eric, but there's Eric Roberts and then there's Eric Schmidt. But Eric, he's just very articulate and very observant, and will really distill his insights down to crisp statements that are sometimes counterintuitive, but as a result, they really stick with you. Some of my favorites are he had this one talk that he gave where he talked about leadership, and he said, unfortunately, as you become a leader, you don't get to do anything anymore. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's like, think about it. You don't get to code, you don't get to design, you don't get to individually contribute to projects or products anymore. And he's like, and as a result, your job as a leader is to play defense, to tell the team, okay, we're going to run in that direction, and I'm going to get things out of the way. I'm going to make sure you have enough resources. I'm going to make sure you have enough people. I'm going to get the board out of the way, public criticism out of the way. New users and new customers, really get that funded up. And it really is true. I think that I think one of the best pieces of advice as I actually went into Yahoo. Right, working on Yahoo, attempting the turnaround, it was a really daunting task, and a lot of very talented people had tried before. And if the answer on Yahoo, it was sort of funny because when people came up to me and said, wait, where's your strategy session? All the new CEOs, because I was the 7th new CEO in 61 months. So in about 5 years, 7 different people in that role. And they said, where's your strategy presentation? And the new CEO shows up. Second day, there's always a big strategy prezo. And I said, well, I'm not going to probably give my strategy prezo, I would think probably for a few months, because I just want to walk around and talk to people and listen. Because I was like, if the solution to some of Yahoo's issues were obvious, someone would have done it already. And we're really going to have to put all of our best observations and insights together to really figure out how to get the company moving in the right direction. And so Eric's, leadership is listening, leadership is defense, or being an executive is defense, is really true. But there's all kinds of, he's such a pundit that there's in almost every scenario in business, like I'll hear him saying, more revenue solves all known problems. He would always say very concisely. A lot of people say that, but that is obvious. But he just had a lot of great observations overall in business that are just widely applicable.
So if I asked people you had mentored, what sayings would they attribute to you then?
Oh, that's a good question. I definitely have repeated the leadership is listening, leadership is defense. One so much that they probably would say, look, I learned that from her, and I would say, well, I learned that from Eric. It is funny because there are people who worked for me at Yahoo and then went back to Google, and they end up with Eric, and they're like, wait, I feel like I just met my grandfather, who has the other side of all these anecdotes. But I think that leadership is incredibly important. I think that constraints fostering creativity is something I've talked a lot about. A lot of people think that creativity should just be unbridled, that it's the white canvas where you just do whatever you want. I actually think that people get really creative when they're really constrained, be it in a startup environment in terms of how you design the company, or be it in terms of overall constraints on products, things like that. I don't know. I think that I would have to ask them and poll them. I'm sure there are more, because I do kind of overall slogans. Well, I would also say decisions in a week, or a good decision today is better than a perfect decision tomorrow. Sometimes you need to. It kind of goes back to that notion of choosing between good choices and making one great. So those are some of those.
So in addition to tech and running companies, there are other interests of yours that are often written about, whether it's fashion or dance or cupcakes. I've read a fair amount about. Do you think these interests are an escape from work, or they help your work, or they inform each other? What's the relationship between?
I think it's funny. I think I've always had, I didn't realize it, but my mother was an art teacher, my father was an engineer, and I think I've always kind of had a multidisciplinary approach to life. I think that's why I liked symbolic systems. I liked this notion of this major that brought a lot of different things together. And I like doing a lot of different things, but seeing the commonalities between them. And so, to me, it's sort of funny. At every company I've ever been at, both Google and Yahoo, people male engineers are always really obsessed with building suspension bridges. And I don't know if it's just the people I work with, but they're really, really obsessed. Maybe we should build a suspension bridge over the road. Maybe we should build a suspension bridge between the buildings. And and for some reason, the women are less so. But I was I've made the point that certainly in fashion and in art, there's plenty of things where all those same design and engineering principles that go into bridge building are at play in just the same way. And to me, I like looking for those commonalities, the engineering elements and everything, or even just the rigor of the process, or being able to spot trends. It's funny because the whole cupcake thing got very overblown. What happened was, I think it was 2003, 2004. It was really before the big cupcake boom. I was talking to Business Week, and I talked about the importance of being able to spot trends. And I said, I'm not as good as some people, but I do have a knack for things. I was both on the internet and off. And he said, well, give me an example of something you think is going to be big in the next few years in the physical world. And I said, I think cupcakes are about to explode. I think you're going to see a whole bunch of companies start building them in Subway-style ovens. I think there's been a real return to comfort food, and like sure enough, within a couple of months after that interview, there were literally like lines around the block at all these different cupcake places. And so then suddenly it got distilled down to like I really really like cupcakes, and I really don't. Like they're fine, but like it's not like I'm obsessed with them. But I actually still do take pride of the fact that I spotted the cupcake trend coming. And some of like Crumb's Bakery and some of the big national bakeries are testimony to that.
So I can see I'm getting the signal to wrap it up soon, so that the students can ask questions. But I have a couple more questions, a couple sort of reflecting questions. Maybe you've reached a stage of your career when you can reflect a little bit. When you think about your experiences up to now, what were some of the unexpected hurdles? Some of the things that you didn't see coming that really caught you by surprise?
That's a good question. I would say, at Google, those 13 years were really hyper-growth, almost all throughout. And so I think one of the most interesting things that we found was that at every order of magnitude, change, something breaks. So the really important, robust part of an organization is, as you're going through that hypergrowth and scaling, are you adept at changing the processes that need to be changed as they need to be changed? So as you watch a company go from tens of people to hundreds of people to thousands of people to tens of thousands of people, and or you go from managing single, like individual people to tens, hundreds, thousands, things at every order of magnitude will break. How you hire, how you promote, how you assign people to projects, how you decide overall as a company what to do, how you decide the strategy. And so I think that some of the hurdles that we overcame are part of what really built a lot of resilience and capability inside of Google, because it became very common for us to change how we did things, because in some cases we were going, and also like number of queries, every time you cross another order of magnitude in terms of number of searches done a day, you'd have something similar. And we got really good at saying, as perfect as the system was for, the last 6 months or the last year, we were okay throwing it out and doing something new and doing something different. And so, we had hurdles and we had things break, and there were plenty of times where, there was a lot of teeth gnashing about what was going on and what was going wrong. A lot of that was, going through the hurdles there. I think at Yahoo, some of the things that I thought would be the hard things, working to rebuild the team before the year in 2012, I came in the middle of the year. 1 in 4 people had left Yahoo in the first 6 months of that year. So, the turnover and attrition had been pretty horrendous. And so building the team back up, attracting really talented people to want to come back there and work on the products and the problems that we were having I thought would be really hard, but that actually ended up being pretty easy. It turned out it was like a lot of people really loved the Yahoo brand, were really inspired by it. I would say, the surprising things were, things that, now are obvious in hindsight, but we had nearly 40% stake in Alibaba. Today it's about 16%. And it was interesting, as Alibaba appreciated in value, it overall appreciated our stock price, it appreciated the company significantly, and it bought us time. But then there was also a moment where it was like, okay, how are we going to get that asset to investors, especially in a way that would be more tax advantaged, given that the basis was essentially zero relative to its basis today. That proved to be a really hard problem. We declared a tax-free spinoff. Coincidentally, everyone can make their own judgment, but coincidentally, the government decided those types of tax-free spinoffs were no longer tax-free. We had to scrap that plan. Ultimately, the plan that we ended up with is the plan that we effectuated today, which was we could either spin the core company of Yahoo away from the Alibaba stake, or we could sell it. And so we ultimately ended up selling Yahoo to basically get the Alibaba asset into a separate company from the operating company of Yahoo. And so, but that ended up being both a surprising boon to the first few years at Yahoo, and then a lot of surprising hurdles where I was like, wait, I thought that a lot more of my days were going to be on Yahoo Mail and fantasy football and a lot less on international tax law. But you take it as it comes.
So I have a lot more questions I would love to ask, but I can see people are getting antsy. One more. Okay. I'm just maybe it's a good way to lead into student questions, which is, do you have what advice, if you had to give one or two sentences of advice to the students who are thinking about what career choices they should make, what courses they should take, what would that be?
I have 4. So I mentor a lot of new college grads over the years. I have 4. 2 of them you've already heard, which is work with the smartest people you can find. They'll push you to be better and stronger and faster in ways than you can imagine. Do something you don't feel ready to do. But then there's 2 others, one of which will seemingly contradict the second one. Be in an environment you're comfortable in. And I'll come back to the contradiction there, but pick a place where you feel really at home. It's funny, I'm a really shy person. And at Google, I never had a problem expressing my opinion or my voice. And I think it was because I was surrounded by a lot of people who were inspired by and liked a lot of the same things I liked. And were excited about technologies and how to apply them. And so I never felt like, sometimes I'd be the only woman in the meeting, but I never noticed that because I just felt so much commonality with the other people there. And I think that when you are somewhere and you're in an environment where you're comfortable, you'll express your opinion, you'll participate a lot more fully. And people will say, well, wait, how does that square with do something you don't feel ready to do, but find somewhere comfortable? And I would say it's almost like athletics, right? Like work out really hard, but wear comfortable clothes. Right, so you want to be somewhere where you don't feel constrained in some arbitrary way from expressing your opinion or your thoughts or what the right thing to do is, but really push yourself on the meat of the issue and the core task at hand. And then the final thing is, a lot of people think about what they can bring to a job as they're entering the workforce. You should also think about what you're going to get out of the job. And so my comment is always, you want to work for someone who believes in you and invests in you. And for me, when I look back, between Eric Schmidt, Larry, Sergey, Jonathan, it was one of the premises of the Associate Product Manager program. But when I said, look, we're going to yell at them a lot, we're going to coach them a lot, but we're going to give them an irresponsible amount of responsibility, right? Like we gave them responsibility where they'd be like the sole product manager on $1 billion business, 6 months out of college. But the type of experience you get from that is invaluable. And having a manager who says, wait, I know you can make that next level. I know you can take that next step. I know you can do this. I know you don't think you can do this right now, but I'm going to give you that opportunity to show your stuff is really important. And so it's important when you're taking that to say, wait, how do I feel about the person who manages me? How do I feel about that company? Are they going to invest in me? Are they going to give me big opportunities? Are they going to give me an opportunity to really participate not only in the company but in the industry, going to conferences, really getting to really meet and know people and learn the art and science of what you're doing in a professional context, I think is really, really important and something that a lot of people are undervalue.
Well, thank you very much. This was really interesting.
Raise your hand and introduce yourself. And wait for the mic. Okay. Can you pass this back?
Thank you very much. It's an honor. Actually, it's really easy to find your achievement as well as the things that we could learn from you on the internet. So I'm going to sort of want to ask it in a different way. So first thing is, first questions. From as the person's as special as you, what are the things that matters to you the most? And then and the second thing is, what are the achievements that your biggest achievement in life that you haven't achieved, and you eagerly want to achieve that? Thank you.
So there's the biggest achievement, and the first one was.
What are the things that matters to you the most?
What matters to me the most? Well, I would say my family. I'm lucky I've got 3 children, and so my family matters to me a lot. My parents matter a lot. But I would say that one of the things I've always been very fond of is I have a theory, probably goes to one of the Mayerisms, about burnout. Because a lot of people worry about burnout, they worry about balance, and I just have a very different theory about burnout and balance. Because you can look at people like Winston Churchill and some of the leaders who worked really, really hard for really long periods of time and never experienced burnout. And part of that is working on something you really love and are really passionate about. And I think part of that is knowing yourself and knowing what I call your rhythm. So a lot of people like to talk about balance, but I like to talk about rhythm, which is knowing what it is that you need in order to not become resentful. Because usually burnout happens because you're like, oh, like I gave so much of myself and I couldn't even get this thing that I want. And I think your rhythm changes over time. Like early in my career, when I didn't have children, like I was like, okay, my rhythm is I like to explore the world, I like to see new places. Once every 4 to 6 months, I need to leave, take a week-long vacation, go somewhere I've never been, and not worry about work. And that's good for my team, and that's good for me, etc. Now I would say, having, like bedtime and wake-up time with my kids is really important. I still love the travel component, but really thinking about it, what is it that you need to stay really fueled up? So I think it changes over time what matters most to you, but I would say that notion of rhythm really matters to me, and being in tune enough with yourself to figure out you can't have everything that you want, but you can have the things that really matter the most to you. And so you just have to really be thoughtful about crystallizing what those are and protecting them. When I was a manager at Google, I had one new college grad where I was like, okay, what's your rhythm? He was working really hard. I was worried about him. And he was like, he thought about it, he came back and he's like, Tuesday night dinner. And I was like, tell me about Tuesday night dinner. And he was like, well, my roommates and I from college, we always get together on Tuesday night dinner and do a potluck. And he's like, if I miss the potluck on Tuesday when it's at someone else's place, or I cancel the potluck when it's at mine, I'm just bummed the whole rest of the week. He's like, I find myself leaving early on Wednesday and Thursday because it's like, wait, I worked all weekend. I didn't even get Tuesday night dinner with my friends. And I was like, well, great. Then you know that about yourself. So don't let work get in the way of it. You should be able to have, Tuesday night dinner. And, you kind of have to castle it and protect it. There was a soccer mom, Katie, who was on the phone with Bangalore at 1 a.m. doing conference calls for her product all the time, and I was really worried about her. And she said, I don't mind the 1 a.m. conference calls with Bangalore at all. Like, don't worry about it. I love my team. I love my product. She's like, what gets me down is when I miss the recital or I'm 5 minutes late for the soccer game. And I was like, okay, then Katie, that's what matters to you. And I was like, it's my job as your manager to make sure that we don't, because then after that I would see it. Katie would get up to leave at 3:45 to make a 4 o'clock soccer game, and someone would be like, oh, wait, can you just stay 5 more minutes? We're almost done. And it was my job to then step in and say, nope, Katie's got to go. And so, for me, my kids are really important right now. Time with my parents, my family is really important. Travel is really important. But you need to know that about yourself. And you'll end up making some other sacrifices, but not sacrifice that. In terms of, overall achievements, there's so many different things. I mean, I really like academia. I always I would love to actually get a PhD in something. So that could be something really great. I would love to be a founder. I would love to found a company because I was early at Google, but I wasn't. I got to be the CEO at Yahoo, but I wasn't the founder. And between working with Larry and Sergey, David Filo, and even to some extent Jerry Yang. And I participated in the acquisition of about 30 companies at Google, about 50 at Yahoo. And so, of those, now I guess hundreds of different founders I've worked with across all those different companies. I really love it. I'm not sure I would be great at it, but, I would really love to have that experience. So, maybe at some point I would found something. But no, those are some of the things still on the hopeful bucket list.
Right. So I'm sure we could get you into the PhD program if you'd like. Get you a TA job.
Hi there. Hi, Marissa. So thanks you so much for coming and talking to us today. You talked a lot about being a mentor and the mentors in your life and leadership, and I was just wondering if in all your experience that you've seen someone and you've said, as a leader, and said that that's not who I want to be, that they were a bad leader, and why they were a bad leader.
Sure. Well, when I ask this question in interviews, I don't ask it necessarily in a leader way, but I'm not going to name names because I always tell the person, tell me about your best job ever, tell me about your worst job ever, but please don't point out which one it is on the resume, lest I know someone or know that company, etc. So I would say, I've gotten to see a lot of different leadership styles, and I don't like leaders who aren't hands-on, but I don't like leaders who aren't willing to do what they ask other people to do. And I think that's a really important principle of leadership. I guess that's another probably slogan of mine where, it's funny, I was on the dance team, which is in high school, And we had, frankly, there was a captain a few years before I later became captain, but before, and she would just boss us around a lot, frankly. Like, she would just like tell us to do like the routines and the exercises a lot more. And of course, she got to stand up in front directing us the whole time, not having, not doing that. And we were like, wait, like, you couldn't do this, like 18 times in a row. And I remember it was funny because then when I became the captain, I realized like I was going to be the one sitting up there in front. I didn't want, all the people on the team to be like, wait, like, easy for you to say. And so it's funny because I started running 3 miles a day as a senior in high school, and I still try and do it, pretty much every day, either running and or walking. But I think that it's just that principle of saying, wait, like, you should be able to do it, you should be willing to do it, right? And I think that that's a quality I really respect in leaders, but it's a quality that really turns me off in other people. I also, because I was at Google during very scrappy days, and because there was frankly like a lot of grunt work that needed to be done at Yahoo, I really also don't like it when leaders especially, but generally anyone will say like, that's not my job. Right? I remember one of the worst interviews I ever had at Google. We were about 200 people. And there was a really formal, stiff guy. He showed up in a suit, right? Like, we were doing the coding exercises. In the middle of the interview, I brought him across to the kitchenette to get some snacks. And there was like one of those water jugs, like a water cooler, with the jugs that go on top. And it was empty. And the guy, of course, was like kind of stuffy and like looked around for a snack. And then he said, oh, well, I wonder when the water cooler changer will be coming by. And I was like, well, the water cooler changer's here. And like I went and like took the empty jug off the top of the water cooler, like went and put it on the rack and like put the water cooler and like put the new bottle on top. But I was like, we're like a 200-person startup. Like, there's no water cooler changer. Like, I don't know what you're thinking, right? Okay. But like that notion of like, oh, that's someone else's job, or like, I'm too good to like change the jug on the top of the water cooler. Like, that just doesn't play well with me. So I like people who are really hands-on and not too stuffy.
Hi. So we talked about like your biggest accomplishments. So I was just wondering, what would you consider one of your biggest challenges, like either professionally or personally, like starting your career?
Starting my career or over the course of it, because I think the answers are probably different.
It could be either.
I would say, finding that notion of rhythm when I first started off. Because at the Google, to be honest, there was no rhythm, right? To the rest of the world, Google just happened. It was this magical idea and this magical growing startup. The experience of being inside was nothing like that, right? It was, I've joked, but it's true. It was like 130 hours a week, multiple like all-nighters in the office, sleeping under your desk, like being strategic sometimes about like how many showers you would take and when, right? Like, I mean, it was just all in. It's funny, my husband has a sort of an incubator co-working space in the city. And like every time I go in there on a Saturday afternoon, I'm like, by the way, I'm very worried about these companies because like they don't have anyone there on a Saturday afternoon. And that doesn't mean like it's not like a badge of honor working that hard and or that, you've got to be willing to do like the 130 hour weeks. I just think when you've got a great idea and you've got a great business opportunity, you want to. Does that make sense? Like, if you feel like, wow, like we have such an amazing opportunity, none of us wanted to like lose that Saturday afternoon to, seize the opportunity in front of us. But also it's funny because to me, Google felt like a cause. One of my routines was I would wake up on Saturday morning, kind of clean my apartment, pay bills, do the mail, all that. But I remember being in a hurry on Saturday morning. Like, I've got to get this done so I can get to the office at 11 because like otherwise like people might not get search results that are as good or as fast or and it felt really important. I think when you're really fired up about your idea and the company, that kind of work schedule really happens. I will say that I probably at that time didn't prioritize enough time for myself, enough time for my parents, things like that. And but I kind of, you realize later, oh, you do need to be able to like have downtime, have that rhythm, know what's important to you. And so, I think that was probably the biggest challenge starting out.
Hi, my name's Camila. I have a question about perseverance. Sorry. When Google wasn't as big as it is today, like what encouraged you to stay during that time of uncertainty?
It's a good question. So what caused me to stay at Google? I guess I really believed in the overall opportunity. I think that it was funny because I was constantly reevaluating. I think even when I took the job at Google, I really had wanted to work in McKinsey's UK office, but I needed 18 months of work experience to get a visa. And so I was like, okay, I'll go do this startup, and maybe 18 months from now, if I don't like it, I'll reapproach McKinsey, and hopefully I'll get the UK office. And then 18 months later, had been really exhilarating working at Google, and like I had developed such friendships there and such working relationships, and I'd gotten to do a little bit of travel, and I'd seen, like, I remember going to Switzerland about a year after I started, and I saw someone using Google in Switzerland, and I was like, what is that doing here, right? And so it was starting to really take hold, and so I think I was constantly reevaluating. After I'd been there for, I guess, 3 years, I applied to go to business school. And I almost left Google to go to business school. But again, like, it's almost, it's perspectives. I had a good conversation with Craig Silverstein, who's was Google's first employee number 3 after Larry and Sergey. And it was funny because I was already planning to come back. Does that make sense? Like, I negotiated with Eric and Larry and Sergey. Okay, I'm going to go do my business degree. I'll come back and intern in the summer. When I'm done, like, I'll come back here, right? Like, I'd worked through all that with me, and I remember Craig, he had dropped out of a PhD program at Stanford, and Stanford was where I got in for my MBA, and Craig was like, look, he's like, I'm not going to do Stanford Google. Like, he's like, you should do it till you're done, and you're sure you're done, and then, like, move on to the next thing instead of going back and forth. And he said, honestly, he's like, it doesn't sound like you're done with Google. It's like you're planning to come right back. So why wouldn't you just stay here? And then we got into this deep conversation where he's like, what is it that you think you'll learn from an MBA program that you can't learn here? And I was like, wow, like, I think I'm going to learn as much here as I would in any MBA program. And then he also said, well, do you think that, there's sort of a cap to your career, that the MBA will help you break through? Do you think that, you would, and as we sort of reasoned through it, I realized, no, I actually probably would get as much valuable experience being there because of the trajectory of the company as I would if I went to do the MBA, and I felt like the opportunities in the long run were probably the same. And I remember saying, well, wait, if I left Google as a manager, as a director, and at the time I was not yet a VP, I don't think I was even a director. That I said, like, if I leave in the middle, then it probably will be hard to get to be a VP somewhere else. So he's like, okay, great. He's like, so then you're kind of committing. If you don't go to business school, you'll stay at Google and make VP here. He's like, but then from there, you'd have other opportunities. You could stay or not. And so I guess in that way, I did reevaluate then and think, okay, like, I'm going to stay. And then I became a VP about 3 years after that. But then I went on to stay for another 7 because I just really loved it. And I loved the products we worked on. I think of them as my children too. I liked the programs. I got to start, like, the associate product manager program, and Google's still like my family. I joke, but I see Larry, Sergey, I see a lot of the early Googlers, and it's like seeing your siblings. It's like seeing your brothers and sisters. It's a really wonderful place.
Thank you.
Is it me? Hi, my name's Aaron Chalia. Thank you so much for coming out today. I'm really curious to kind of hear about what you think the most defining quality was for yourself early on in your career, and maybe the other APMs that you kind of trained early on that allowed them to be successful, if there was one or multiple.
I will say I'll concentrate on the associate product managers that I hired that did really well, and they all had an amazing technical aptitude for how technology could be applied. Right, and one of the questions I would ask is, what's the coolest thing you've seen in the last 6 months and why? So the most interesting answers I got to questions as I was hiring APMs would be like, they'd be, like the Xbox Connect, and I'd be like, why is that interesting? He's like, well, and the candidate was like, well, it's accurate to within 3 millimeters. in 3 dimensions for under $100, and it's going to be in every living room. And I was like, well, why is that interesting? And he was like, well, because you can create 3D models of anything in your home that you want. And I was like, well, why is that interesting? And he was like, well, I was like, what did you want to do? Like remake your favorite coffee mug? Like, what are you going to do with the 3D model of anything in your home? And he was like, well, like, for example, like, what if you never had to like dress your children again or like bring them shopping again? Because you could just like make a model of them and like just, you know, you'd order clothes that always fit and were like the right thing. And so, you know, people who could like see, you know, hey, there's this device, but here's an amazing application for it. They all had that. But the other thing they all were very good at was managing through influence and managing through data. One of the downsides or the hard things about being an APM is you're hired right out of school, you're 23 or 24 years old, you're assigned to a team. The team is probably filled with people who have 10, 15, 20 years of coding experience. And their question is, why should I listen to you? You're telling me this feature is important. You're telling me this is the milestone we need to hit, or this is the deadline we need to make. Why is that important? And I think the people who went on to do really well were really good at asking that question, answering that question with data. This is why I think this is an important priority. This is why I think we need to make this deadline. And that gave them a lot of credibility, and it really won them the ability later to be able to make more decisions and more suggestions from instinct. But really bringing data to bear on those questions was an important way for them to win credibility from more experienced people. I'm happy to stay and answer more questions after, yeah.
Hey, my name's Theo. I guess you spoke briefly about your experience transitioning into product management. I guess my question is, how do you, I guess, within technical roles and in your personal life, how do you approach self-doubt, or I guess, do you circumvent it, or do you introspect, or do you catch yourself ruminating, you know?
Yeah, no, it's hard because I still remember. I think you have sort of these like profound moments of self-doubt. I remember we were launching Google News, which went on to be a huge success. But I remember we were getting ready to launch it. We had worked on it for about 9 months, a team of like 5 or 6 people. We'd had a lot of arguments about the minimum viable product as we went out the door, things we absolutely needed to have or didn't need to have. And I'd given probably about 15 or 20 press interviews about the product. And like the morning of the launch, I remember like I was getting ready for work, and all of a sudden I was like, wait, like it's 6 web pages and a Perl script. Like that, yes, it does k-means clustering and gathers news from all over the world and presents us in this interesting way, but like is all just smoke and mirrors, and people are gonna be like, wait, like this isn't a news service, like what is this? And so you have those moments, but one of the things I've learned is I like to launch early and often. I think taking an idea, you've got to get it to a point of where it's just minimally viable, but launching earlier I think is better than launching later, because it gives you feedback and it makes sure if you're way off in what you're doing, it corrects. I got to go to the Apple event this morning where they launched all the new devices, and I mean, Apple is amazing because it is just like they have this, I call it the difference in innovating between castle building and bird walking. And Apple is the best castle builder in the world. And what I mean by castle building is like they pull the curtain closed, they don't show anyone what they're doing, they don't do any focus groups, any market studies, and they just build. Like, the first iPhone, they were building it for like 5 years before they actually announced it and launched it. And like even all the devices they launched today, many of them have been in the works for a minimum of a year, if not longer. And they've just got to, they just sort of, will skate to where the puck is going to be as opposed to where it is. But if you think of it as a vector space, if you're starting at a point and the vector is driven by time, you're like, okay, I'm here, and the perfect product is in the space here. How do I get from here to there? And like Apple has this amazing ability to, without any feedback from the market, with the curtains drawn, just vault and land right on it. And when you do that, it's like a worldwide wow, right? Like just oohs, ahs, amazing, like most profitable company in history, et cetera, right? Like total bullseye. The problem is there's a lot of companies that do castle building and they spend years, man years of time and labor, and they land there, right? And so like, and you're like, oh, like that's bad because that's a dud, right? And it means it's a total redo, it's a total pivot of your product, etc. And I think if you look at Google's cadence of launches, even like Facebook, a lot of the other companies are much more iterative, and they're what I call bird walking, where like, you know, we launched something and then we would let the market kind of tell us what they liked and didn't like about it and kind of pull us back onto the vector. And then we'd launch something else and they'd like pull us back onto the vector. And I think that when you have those moments of self-doubt, launching is sometimes the antidote because you get feedback and it tells you what's important and kind of recenters you. Like the funny example was we had 6 people on the Google News team. It was right before launch. We decided we didn't want to launch on a Friday. Fridays are bad days to launch. And so we decided we would spend a couple more days polishing the product, and we had time to put in probably one more feature. Someone suggested sort by date. Someone suggested search by location. And the tragic part of us having 6 people on the team is we debated it out, what the different features were, could we actually get it done in time, and then we voted. And we split 3-3. And then we spent like 2 hours in this room with like the team being like, the people who want search by location are so silly, the people who want sort by date are so silly, like blah, blah, blah. And we went back and forth and back and forth. And finally, I was the product manager, so I forget what side of the debate I was even on, but I just said, guys, we're just going to spend the weekend polishing bugs. We're not going to do either feature. Right? Like we aren't going to have hard feelings on the team and like rush to get this feature in. We're just going to launch without sort by date or search by location. And we launched. And I remember going through the emails. We launched at 6 a.m. By noon, we had about 300 emails from users who were using it that, you know, ultimately were feature suggestions. And I went through them, and there were like 297 asking for sort by date. And there were 3 that said it would be nice to find news near me. And I was like, okay, like asked and answered. Like the market just told us, like, this is the feature that you're missing that we need. And so I think that when you have that self-doubt, launching, getting product feedback, because almost no one will ever do it as well as Apple does it in terms of saying, wait, we know exactly where we're going and we can spend 2 years with no feedback and land it. And that iterative approach is in many ways more guaranteed to be successful.
Thank you.
I want to be conscious of our time, so I just want to say this was phenomenal. Thank you very much. Thank you for taking your time.
Thank you.